Welcome back to the Pediatric Speech Sister Show. I am so thrilled to have my bestie on here, Laila Fofana. This has been my best friend literally since college. We've roomed together. We've literally experienced life together, basically grew up together. So, right. So,
Yeah.
I am so excited to have her on here. The reason why I brought her on the show, y'all, is because she is just so experienced when it comes to research. She's come to me. I just remember those long talks with you about a lot of this disparities, honestly, that you found a lot of passion in when it's come to the research
Yeah.
industry. And so I wanted to bring you on here just from your perspective and your cultural perspective and anything that we could really learn from you in the space.
Yes. Well, thank you so much, Bestie, for having me on your show. It's a huge honor and just a blessing to be able to have these conversations with you on a larger platform. So thank you so much for inviting me today. I'm super excited to talk about this topic.
Yes, we're basically inviting the audience onto our FaceTime call. So
Yeah.
this is basically what this is. So Layla, I'm gonna have you go ahead and introduce yourself.
All right. Well, my name is Laila Fofana. I am a former researcher, specifically clinical research, and I am currently looking into getting into acting. I'm an aspiring actor. So I've left the research field, and we'll get into that a little bit more. And I'm trying to take my expertise and my passion for life into a new field and get into film and TV and possibly theater as well. So it's a bit of a transitionary phase for me, but I've learned a lot about research in the last probably like 3 years now. I've been in research, so it's been a little while, and I have a lot of great takeaways that I learned from the field that I hope I can take with me into my next venture as an actor and an artist.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm excited to get into that and get into the transition and the intersections on this call. What would you say is your why?
Ooh, my why is people. At the center of everything that I do and that I want to do, I always want to make sure the people that are around me, that are seeing me, or that are in my presence, whether or not I know them personally or I just see them at work or day to day, I just want to be able to have an impact on their lives. I always think about the quote. I believe it's Maya Angelou said, it's not about what you say or how you act. It's really how you make people feel. That quote really sticks with me. And forgive me if I'm wrong about who said it
I
exactly,
think
but
it was
I think it was. Yeah. And I
yeah.
just remember that quote always sticking with me because I think about how other people have made me feel where I feel like I haven't been heard. And it's happened in research as well. It happens all the time. And it makes me want to be an advocate for those who don't have a voice.
Mm.
Thinking about the times when I didn't really have a voice and didn't feel confident in my voice to speak up and to stand up for what was right. And I think that's half of the issue sometimes that we see in the healthcare industry is that, people don't speak up for things that they know are, is things that should be fixed or things that are not right. And so I want to be able to just impact the people around me in positive ways and be able to shape their lives in any way possible for the good.
Well, let me ask you first about your identities and how that has shaped how you show up in the clinical space and also in your acting career.
Yes. Well, I'm a black woman,
Mhm.
and I do go by she, her. And so, as a black woman and also a Muslim American woman, I always want to be able to bring my identity to the forefront, especially with Islam, because I am, not the traditional idea of what an Islamic woman looks like. And a lot of times I'll get comments when I tell people I'm Muslim, and they're like, "Really? Oh, wow! I'm so surprised." And I'm like, "Yeah, actually, a good majority of African people and Black people across the world are Muslim." And as Americans, we can be closed off to those kind of things because it's not our idea of what things should look like. So I like to bring that to the forefront and be able to, I don't want to say challenge people, but almost kind of challenge people to think outside their box. I think that perspective is a hell of a thing, and a lot of people don't want to look at perspectives outside of their own. And
Mhm.
my goal with my identity and how I bring that to to the, to the forefront of everything that I do is to really help to broaden people's perspectives of what something looks like. Because they might see a Black woman and think, oh, she must be XYZ, I've got her all figured out. I know she probably acts this way, or maybe she dates these specific people, or she's Christian, or, they have these preconceived notions. And that can be really, really dangerous, as we see in the medical field very often. It is very dangerous. So I think it's important to always, represent myself in the best light, but also try to bring a new perspective into other people's, worldview.
Have you seen, let me think how I can phrase this question, because I want to kind of highlight that identity and even just how people with certain identities, especially being Muslim, in America has been after 9/11 has just it's just so bad
Yeah.
how Americans can view people of Islamic faith.
Yeah.
So how has that shown up or manifested in the clinical space if you've seen it?
It's a great question. I haven't seen it too much, specifically because I think a lot of uh, people who are very religious and a lot of Islamic people tend to stay away from the research field,
Mm,
which is unfortunate. But I think that has been a huge barrier in research, is that the people who are conducting the research are not necessarily seeking these groups out. And so there's a lot of misinformation that gets passed around in these communities. It's not
mm,
just in Muslim communities. There are lots of other communities, specifically like religious communities, that are very afraid of things that are happening outside of their world and outside of their communities. And so for me in Islam, when it comes to the Muslim community, I do notice that there is a bit of a disconnect, because they tend to they distrust a lot of people that are doing research, or institutions that are conducting research, whether it be clinical, psychological. It really doesn't matter. It all falls under the umbrella of distrust, and misinformation spreads that way. And it really impacts these communities, and it's many communities like that in New York. I remember there, during COVID, there was a specific Hasidic Jewish community that, unfortunately, they were so closed off to seeking outside help that there was a huge outbreak of COVID in their communities, and a lot of them suffered because of it. And I never blame the communities. It's really, I think, the job of the researcher and the practitioners to make them feel safe and make them feel like they can be trusted, and just be able to have connections to these communities. And that's not something we see happen a lot. And so in the future, I would really love to see a lot of Muslim leaders and, people in the community that are taking charge in the health and well-being of the people in their communities. I would love to see them step in a little more into the healthcare field and try to work with other people other practitioners and clinical researchers who are trying to help. But it really has to work on both ends. If one end is unwilling to help, or one end is unwilling to work, then it won't work. So it has to be a collaborative effort. But yeah, that is a big thing that I see a lot. And I would love for that to be something that is addressed more widely in clinical research moving forward. Yeah.
I like how you mentioned us creating safe spaces and us doing
Mhm.
our part to help these diverse communities. And then I think about the title of our conversation today, the urgent need for diverse research in Black and Brown communities. So I'm like, so let me touch on that a little bit.
Yep. Let's
So
get into it.
yeah, let's get into it. How would you say that we can create those safe spaces?
Great question. I and it's so interesting, because when I first started in when we first started in our careers, because we graduated at the same time.
Yeah.
And for those who don't know, Melanie and I lived together our first year out of college. We were both just working and trying to figure out what we wanted to do. And I was working in a nonprofit that was specifically an emergency response center. And one of the initiatives that I loved, I worked on very closely, was we were going into neighborhoods in Baltimore and working with churches specifically, and churches that were really well plugged into their communities, that had, trusted allies throughout the communities. and we were trying to find ways to bring them what they needed. But the way it started, and even though I don't work there anymore, I will always speak highly of them because they did a really good job of creating trust in that community before they started anything. Whereas the public health department in Baltimore was more so just like, well, let's just go out and just, give them all this information and kind of just bombarding them. And I think what the disconnect happens is they don't start building trust. It almost feels like they are just kind of trying to boss these people around, and it is well-meaning, of course, but if there is no establishment, if the trust isn't established prior to doing that, it's very, very hard for a lot of people to want to have that conversation because they don't trust you. They don't think that you are coming in and doing what's right for their communities, and in their minds they're like, well, I know what's best for my community because I see what the need is, because I live here or I work here or whatever, and so it has to start there. It has to start by going out into the communities, speaking to these leaders, speaking to whoever it is that is well plugged in, and just getting an idea of what the need is, where the issues stem from, and then going from there. And that's something we did in Baltimore. And I was really proud of that project because there were a few days where my boss just sent me to Baltimore and was like, hey, just drive up there, go meet these women and these men and these people that are really taking the charge in their communities, and just get to know them and ask them what they need, ask them what they have so we can assess where they're at. And then we can fill that gap between where they're at and what they need. And so, yeah, that's how that conversation really got started. And I think I left before they finished the initiative. So unfortunately, I didn't get to see it come to fruition. But from what I did get to see and what I did get to do, there was really an established layer of trust and collaboration and camaraderie that a lot of health practitioners don't think about. So yeah, that is makes a huge difference. Really does.
I like how you mentioned how, let's just say, for example, the public health department, it's well-meaning,
Yeah.
in speech pathology and just overall in cultural responsiveness. We talk a lot about family-centered care,
Mm-hmm.
where, the family is the expert. A lot of times as the healthcare professionals with the degrees and the accolades, we show up like we know everything, but
Mm-hmm.
that actually makes the bridge even longer.
Yes.
Between us. It actually makes the gap even wider between us. So I really like how you brought that up. I do kind of want to not pivot, but I didn't even ask what triggered your passion in the clinical space or what got you into research. I don't think I ever really asked you that before.
Really? Oh, I'm
I don't think
surprised.
I actually know that. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, thank you for asking. So as I mentioned, my first job was at a nonprofit, and that job was really special because we were a nonprofit that helped to bridge the gap between patients who need medications and patients in general who just typically we work with patients who are needing medication during emergency preparedness, but we were also working on just helping people in general be prepared, better prepared for climate change as well, because as we know, climate change really is changing the face of what natural disasters look like, and
Mm,
it's only going to get worse, unfortunately. So we
mm,
wanted to be able to try to meet them in the middle and figure out how we could help them. And I loved that aspect of it. I loved that we got to really get down to business in a way, and tackle these issues at the core. I think for me, it almost felt like it wasn't enough. And I know
mm,
that sounds kind of weird or crazy, but I don't know. I remember there was one time during Hurricane Harvey, I was on the phone with someone and we were trying our best to bring them, the medications that they needed. And there was only so much we can do because we really were only a middleman in that role.
right.
And so we could connect them to the private sector, who could maybe connect them to someone in the public sector who was working to help bring them their medications, like the Cajun Navy, as for an example. So, but as a middleman, there's only so much you can do, and you're speaking to both people on different ends. And it felt like sometimes we were really limited in
Mm,
what we could do and how we could help. So that made me want to pursue a career in medicine. And I subsequently applied to NYU and did a post-baccalaureate program. It is a post-baccalaureate pre-medical program. I know it's a mouthful, but it was basically a program for people who wanted to go to medical school. So I thought, I want to be able to be in public health. I want to be able to address these issues, but I want to be more hands-on and have more autonomy in what I do instead of just taking orders from people and just listening to
Mm.
what others, have to say. And so, yeah, that's really what started my journey into the research space. I wanted to feel like I could make a difference in someone's life, and I would say that like sometimes I felt that way. I think with research, it felt more frustrating than not. But I will say in research, you do get more of a hands-on feel for what these issues really, where they stem from, and what they're really doing to people.
Could you tell us a bit about your experience in the research space and even the parts that were frustrating to you and the parts that you'd like to celebrate?
Sure. Yeah. I think I'll start with the frustration.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So, my biggest frustration when it came to research was always the way we went about doing the research. And so, my first job in research, I was working at an institution, a university, but specifically like a research institution at the university. And it was a smoking cessation study that we were doing where we tried to see if we could get patients to switch from combustible cigarettes to electronic cigarettes and see if that could help people who had COPD. And
Wait, I'm so sorry to interrupt. What's COPD before?
oh, I'm so sorry. COPD is it's a lung condition. So people who smoke, if you've been smoking for a very long time, typically people who've been smoking for a long time will develop COPD, and it really constricts their airways and it makes it hard for them to breathe and talk and do everyday things that you and I take for granted.
Mm,
So these patients are people who are typically in their 40s, 50s, and up. Sometimes they would be in their 30s. Rarely they'd be in their 20s. But overall, we were talking to white people, and they were only ever white people. I think maybe we had maybe two or three people that were Black. No one who was, of the Latin community, nobody who was in the Asian community, no one who was Native American. I mean, those groups were not represented at all.
okay.
And that was the first thing I noticed where I was like, everyone we recruit is white. And the only reason that was because we were recruiting people from a database that was at the hospital. So if you were a patient at this hospital, and typically, if you were a patient, you have to have money because it was a very expensive hospital. It wasn't like a public hospital. So this was our database we were using. These are the people who we called. Instead of really going out into the communities and trying to find people who were smokers and find different creative ways to diversify our portfolio, we really only focused on what we had because it was easier and we just needed numbers. And that
Mm,
has been my
mm,
biggest frustration with research, is that a lot of the times it's a business, right?
mm,
Everything you do. And unfortunately, we live in a society where every single thing is a business. Even healthcare is a
right.
business. When it should be a right, it is a
Mm,
privilege, really, and a luxury to have healthcare. And
yeah.
so in the research field, everything is really driven by how much money you have.
Mm,
And the only way to get money is to apply for grants and be, granted these large sums of money to conduct your research. The only way to get those grants is to have a lot of data, and have a lot of data that supports your hypothesis or your theory or whatever.
mm,
And that was always my biggest gripe with research, was that we were so focused on the data. We were so hyper fixated on, well, we need to get our numbers up. We need to make sure that we're recruiting, hundreds. I remember getting on the phone with you and discussing how frustrated I was,
mm,
because that was the only issue. And when I didn't recruit a whole, 100 people in 2 weeks, I got in trouble for that. And I
mm,
would always, bring it up in meetings and say, I get that this is the issue, but one, we're not even looking at the quality of the people we are getting. Most of these people don't even want to participate in the study. They just want to quit smoking.
yeah,
We're not
yeah.
really, so we're not offering them, any viable solutions. We're really just using them to see if these things work. And for a lot of them, it wasn't successful and they were frustrated. And so we kind of got into that weird cycle of just getting anyone who would say yes. 95% of them would be white. And then we'd have all this data. And to me, I was looking at the data and said, this doesn't represent all of the city. This is
Yeah,
a diverse city. You
Yeah,
know,
yeah,
it's,
yeah.
you know what I mean? Like, it's a melting pot of cultures and racial identities and gender identities, and we didn't factor
Mm,
any of that into the
mm.
conversation. And everywhere that I've worked, I've only worked at 2 places, but both of them were very large institutions,
Yeah,
very
yeah.
prominent and, very, very well-known institutions that didn't really factor that in. I don't think I've ever worked on a clinical research project where we factored in race, which is not good. Yeah.
I have so many things to say about that, because one institution specifically that, and obviously anyone listening to this can be like, they are being very specific for not saying the name. They're like, I want to know the name. No, we're not going to say the name. But I will say that one institution that you are working at is in a very large city, like you said, very diverse. I mean, both institutions, but one specifically really diverse, and the population
Yeah.
is it's like I almost picture more so black and brown people, more so white people in that city. And so it's very shocking
Yeah.
and not telling, but just more so a disservice. I mean, and it's also it's a lack of it's poor research practices, in my opinion, it's
Yeah.
poor research practices
It
because
is.
it's like, how can we let me just give you an example
Mhm.
how at least in speech pathology we always do a lot of research when it comes to, let's say, like autism or
Mm.
speech language disorders, but
Mhm.
the population for our like standardized tests are majority white. So thankfully, I mean, so in that sense, for a lot of tests, it's up to the speech pathologist to be culturally competent and to know when to modify the test. And
Yeah.
then even when we modify the test, we can't give standardized scores, or we shouldn't give standardized
Interesting.
scores because it wasn't normalized on diverse
Mm.
communities. And
Right.
so, yeah, it's very interesting that you're saying this, that, because I'm kind of like in a speech bubble a lot of times,
Yeah.
where this is across the board. Um, I want to mention we do have Sister Alice is in here. She's like, I made it, so she's happy to be a part of this conversation. Um, Fatima in the audience says connecting with the community is a critical component with understanding the healthcare needs of Black and Brown communities. It helps build trust. She also says it seems as if we can't always trust the data because it doesn't represent a broader, diverse
Yeah.
enough subset that would provide a more accurate outcome from the results. Exactly.
Exactly. Yeah. And Fatima makes a really great point, because that data really is important because it not only informs practitioners, but it also informs policy. People make policy based off of this data. And so if the data is not accurately representing the public that it is supposed to support, then it's not going to support that public. It's not going to be for the greater good of the people, the majority of the people who live in said city or county or state. And so, yeah, that has been the biggest issue that I have seen within research, and it's interesting that you've seen that as well in your field. It seems like
Mm,
it's something that happens really across the board,
mm.
unfortunately.
Well, Michael Hyatt is in here and they say, so what do you do about it?
So that is a
Mm.
great question.
Mhm,
I think
mhm. What are the solutions?
so. It's a tough question because it's an institutional issue. So it's almost like asking, how do we stop systematic racism? It's,
It's like,
it's
let's,
not like.
how long do you have?
Right, exactly. Like if we had hours and hours, we could talk about the solutions. I think the best thing that we can do is to talk about it more. Also,
Mm,
more cross collaboration, things like this, like even having this conversation right now between two friends who are well versed in their fields creates the conversation. And I think it's more so about making people informed and also for standing up for what's right. When I was working in research, that was something I brought up a lot, and unfortunately my voice only carries so far. If I'm the only one saying it, nobody else is going to
right.
really care. But if two people say it, then maybe a third will feel, also strong enough and have the confidence enough to also be able to speak on it. So it really is almost like a domino effect sometimes when, the more people you have, the more support you have, the more likely change will come. But I do think that it is something that is so deeply ingrained in our society and in our healthcare system that it's not something that one person alone can do. And this is why community is important. And we talk about this all the time about how we foster community within our own homes, within our family members and friends. And that's the start. If we can create, communities that not only communicate with each other, but cross communicate with other communities that are dealing with similar things. We have the internet now. So there's so many more opportunities and ways that we can connect with each other. And if we can continue to have these conversations and bring it up and not be afraid to say, hey, I worked in research and they don't know what they're doing. And they are not doing things in a way that is, properly representing the people that they serve. That's how we can start. Yeah, that's a good.
Thank you so much. So we do have Audrey in here, and she says, for the sake of employing care in our research practices, what kind of data collection methods would you lean toward?
Ooh, that is a great question. Could you repeat the question one more time, please?
Yeah. And let me see if I could actually put it in here.
Oh,
Yeah, I'm going to show it so you can see it. There we go.
oh,
For the
nice.
sake of for the sake of employing care in our research practices, what kind of data collection methods would you lean toward?
So typically in the research I've done, we always use quantitative methods, specifically with clinical research, because things are really, it's always like a numbers game. Like we're really looking at numbers. I think that one collection method that we could use is really almost like canvassing. There was the last job I had, what we did is we would go to different centers that were almost like partners of our clinic, but they were just other centers that did very different things. Maybe they weren't even research centers, but they still would collect information and data on the people that they serve. So, for example, maybe there was a shelter, like a homeless shelter, that they collect information on whether the people that are coming in are men, women, trans men, trans women. They even will collect gender identity and sexual orientation. And so we are able to use that information because we have a partnership and a relationship with those institute or organizations, I should say.
Yeah.
So starting small, I would say, starting small, kind of similar to what I did with at my old job at the nonprofit, going to people, knocking on their doors, even like maybe not residential areas, but even if you go to an area where there's a lot of, grassroots organizations, people that are working on the ground, people that know exactly what the issues are that the people in their communities are facing, they will have numbers, they will have data. They might not be using it, but it's going to be there, and it is a reliable source of information that we can use.
Thank you. So Michael Hyatt says, what are the positions of power and influence in this industry to apply for to make the difference? So that way we go beyond just having the conversation.
Yeah, I think getting involved in your local, I'm trying to think of a good one, like a food bank or a homeless shelter. These places are places that I think typically are overlooked because they don't have a lot of power or influence. But again, it's a powers and numbers type of thing. I think that if we want to be able to make a difference, if we want to be able to put ourselves in the position of power, we have to understand that we already have that power. And it doesn't really seem that way. One person individually is not going to get it done. But as a collective, we have a lot of power, actually, and influence. It doesn't, I think we are dealing also with a lot of, and this is something I've noticed generationally. Every generation kind of has a different idea of how capitalism works and how the system is. And I'm noticing the younger generations, like our generation and also Gen Z specifically, are very much so working against the ideas of capitalism. So they feel like, wait, I actually don't want to work a 9 to 5 and live alone and have to do this life thing all by myself. Individualism is killing us.
Yeah.
And so if I can, maybe I can find a community here. Maybe I can find a voice, have someone to talk to, even Twitter. I've used Twitter to make community with people that I would have never known otherwise. And so once we can kind of find a way to collaborate more across the board, I think people will understand that we do hold the power. I think a lot of people feel powerless as an individual. And that's how capitalism works. That's how this whole
Mm,
system is able to really feed off of us, is by
mm.
making us feel like we're alone, making us think we are individuals, and having us live in that system, only for us to feel powerless and then have no influence. But we do have power. I won't say we don't have power. We just have to realize that the power of the collective and of the whole is greater than anything that could ever, come against us. Yeah.
I like how you started answering because I also want to add to that. I like how you started answering with mentioning homeless shelters and other organizations, even starting small. Because when I'm reading the question, what are the positions of power and influence in this industry that we can apply for? The first thing that comes to my mind and probably other people's minds is like, well, if I want to change the policies, let me get in the government. I
Yeah.
will say, from my experience, I joined this field and I still have this passion in my profession is to help close the academic achievement gap.
Yep.
What I realized is I wanted to do it from a speech pathology standpoint. So I got into the public school system.
Mm-hmm.
That thing is well oiled.
Yep.
Okay. So not to say I don't have power, but it's very hard. It was very hard for me to really and truly make a change on a larger scale by being in the system. Yes, I was able to make it within the special education team. And maybe if I would have just stuck it out, I would have been able to do it. But I also had moral injury just watching all of the disdain around me. So I had to get
Yeah.
out for a second. But what I will say is just like what you're saying, Layla, like we do have the power. And I say it takes us continuing to educate ourselves and then going into these spaces and educating others. And so using our voices. So just like what you said, this conversation is very powerful. This
Yeah.
is powerful because we're planting so many seeds for everyone who's listening and planting seeds within ourselves. It's like we're watering that plant
Yeah.
for it to grow and continue to spread.
Agreed.
Um,
Agreed.
yes. Okay. So Sister Audrey had another question, and listening to our dialogue, she's thinking about focus groups for
Mhm.
community-based research. Yeah.
Yeah.
We underestimate the power of qualitative research, by the way. I love qualitative research.
Yeah, and I'm glad you asked that question, Audrey. Thank you, because yeah, we typically quantitative research tends to dominate in clinical research, because like I said, when you're applying for grants, when you're applying, for funding, everyone's just looking at numbers. They're looking for numbers. The more you have, the better chances you are, have to get the funding. And so when it comes to qualitative research and getting focus groups together, asking people, that is a huge deal, and that is a great way to be able to gain opinion, to figure out the opinions of the people. I think the one thing we need to really think about when it comes to focus groups is making it diverse. So
Mm,
we need someone who is representing every community, whether that, it's a racial, racially, gender identity, even socioeconomic status. All of those different, the varying levels need to be represented in some way. So I think that the only way that a focus group or any type of community-based research can work is if we're doing it in multiple communities. Because if you just go to one, you're not going to get a diverse, set of opinions. So
mhm.
yeah, so more diversity amongst these groups, and really, it's a lot of work. I think that's why a lot of people don't want to do it, because it's a lot of work.
Yeah.
But I think it's very imperative that a lot of these clinical researchers, practitioners, research institutions spend a good amount of funding, a good amount of time going into various communities, getting their opinions, doing focus groups like Audrey suggested, and really understanding what it is that they are looking at and what it is that they are looking for. That's huge.
I am so excited, Layla, to continue this conversation. I'm sitting here like daydreaming about everywhere we can go with this.
Yeah.
But I want to get into your career as an actor and really just how you plan to bridge that gap between the clinical space and acting and really just your passions for the two.
Yeah. Thank you for bringing that up. So yeah, I feel like there typically isn't a lot of overlap in these two fields. But I do see a lot of overlap in terms of the way people are represented or
Mm,
not represented. So when I think about, and I'm going to take this back to your question about my identity as a Muslim woman.
mhm,
So one thing that I think is really interesting about film and TV and just culture and sociology in general is the things that we are consuming on TV and in film and in the media really shape how we think in so many ways and in really dangerous ways sometimes. So I
Yeah.
think about Americans, I'll focus on Americans since we are in America. Americans will watch, a TV documentary or not a documentary, but something that is of fictional, I should say. And they'll see it as truth, whether or not it's a documentary or a fictional story. They'll always kind of see it as the tell all be all. So when you are watching a film or TV special and you see a Muslim person being depicted as, let's say, like a terrorist, we've seen that many, many, many times.
Mm-hmm.
That is going to shape your idea of what Islam is. That is, especially if you are young. And a lot of us watch a lot of TV
Mm-hmm.
and growing up watched a lot of TV. And so your ideas of how people act and how they should be, what they should look like, even me walking into a room, people will automatically have preconceived notions based on what they have seen in the media or on TV or in the movies. It's always going to reinforce these negative ideas about a certain group. And we see that a lot in in the Black community, and how a lot of people outside of our communities have preconceived notions about us. And
Right.
a lot of time it is influenced by what you are consuming in the media and what you see on TV. And so it's very similar to me. They're very similar in regard to the fact that that the people who are running the show, if you were running, you're running this TV program, you're a writer, you're a producer, a creator, it's your job to accurately represent these people. It's your job to accurately show the perspectives of these people. And if
Mm-hmm.
you aren't doing that, then it is impossible for you to do it authentically.
Mm-hmm.
I think about so many shows that are about Black people that are run by white men or white people. And it's
Mm-hmm.
infuriating because it's a story, right? There's so
Right.
much power in storytelling. I think I've always loved watching TV, and I've always loved being able to watch someone's story unfold or watch a story just come to life. And to me, it's very irresponsible, and it happens all the time when we see other groups taking over the narrative of a story that does not belong to them.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't feel comfortable creating a story about a group of people that I know nothing about, or a
Right.
group of people a community that has experienced atrocities that I haven't experienced myself, or
Mm-hmm.
community that I just don't belong to, because it's not an accurate depiction. And it creates stereotypical ideas of what that group looks like and how they act. And so I think a lot of creators have that responsibility. Actors, from actors to writers to producers, showrunners, they all have that responsibility because it's a collaborative experience, right? It's not on just one person. It is supposed to be a collaborative experience. So if you're in the room and you're a Black actor and your showrunner or your producer, whoever is white and is telling you this is how it's going, and you're like, this sounds kind of stereotypical, or this doesn't sound,
Mm-hmm.
you know, but if you don't have the power to change it, it's going to get made and it's going to get done, you know? And so I think that the way that we approach research and the way that we approach TV and film and just the entertainment industry in general are very similar. They all require cultural competence in a way that is able to uplift the stories that they are telling and the people that they are serving or the people they are performing in front of. It all
Mm-hmm.
to me aligns, and so that's a long-winded way of saying, of explaining how I have seen those two things connect. Yeah.
Oof, thank you so much. Can I add just like a funny tidbit?
Yes, of course.
Okay, so I'm thinking about how you said TV has those subliminal messages that cause stereotypes. And
Yes.
I remember in high school, I went to Japan, and I got to go to, it was like an exchange. So I was at a Japanese high school, and obviously I was the only Black person there, probably the first Black person he's ever seen in real life.
Mhm.
And he was so excited to talk to me about 50 Cent and show me his hip hop dances, Layla.
No. That's crazy.
He was so hyped to show me his hip hop dances, and I'm like, that is so funny how we're being depicted internationally. And I love how 50 Cent is like our model.
I know. Like, she's gonna love this. Everyone loves 50 Cent. She's Black, of course. Yeah, that's not surprising. I think I remember you telling me that story, or just telling me like your experience in Japan and how people perceive you. And I know, like, at Howard, in our freshman year, a group of students went to China, and I remember they came back and they were like, everyone was staring at us. People were taking pictures with them, and they were almost like, celebrities. Like, they kind of felt like they were like celebrities and stuff. But it just shows you how little exposure people get. And we live in in a melting pot. America is a huge melting pot. Most other countries aren't like America in that regard.
Right.
And so I think it's even easier for people outside of America to see the content that's coming out of America, and not, form these opinions. It's impossible to not form these opinions.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's interesting.
I thought that was hilarious. Well, Laila, can you tell us just what changes you would like to see in our approach moving forward, just to conclude the conversation?
Yeah, I would like to see more accountability. I would like to start there. I think, and this is hard to say because I've been in research for so long, and because now I'm, going into the entertainment industry, but I just think that 95% of the people who are doing it are not doing it for the right reasons. And it's unfortunate because it really does impact people's lives. I think, especially in the entertainment industry, I think people don't see it as a big deal because they're like, oh, it's not real, it's not real. But it has real effects in real life, and it impacts people in real ways. And I feel like the accountability has not, these people who are taking the charge and leading these initiatives and these research studies and these shows and whatever they're doing, they are not taking accountability for the fact that there isn't a cultural lens that they are looking through. I feel like they're looking through a money lens. Not surprising, because it's the world we live in. A lot of money makes the world go round, and people will focus on that and will churn out whatever information or whatever content that they can to get what they want. But there has to be a level of accountability. There has to be a level of understanding. And if I feel like I have certain privileges that other people may not have, because just other different things that I feel like allow me to have a voice. And I think it's important for people like us, especially, to bring this up, because the people who should be held accountable are never going to bring it up. Right. But we are in positions of privilege where we can bring it up. Having this conversation live on the internet is a privilege. And that's not lost on me. And so I think if we are able to continue to have these conversations, if we're able to hold these people accountable and speak up for what's right, and not just sit there and be like, okay, I guess this is how it is. Oh, well, like, no, this is wrong and it should not be done. I think we need to start there. That would, be a good place to start.
Accountability. That's strong. I'm in the comment section. So we have fans. Fatima is definitely just reiterating that cultural competence is so important in anything. We do have Hassan here. Thank you for coming, Hassan.
Oh, hi.
My classmate from Howard. So thank you so much for coming to this
We're a fan of you too.
Yes, we love you, Hassan. Yes, and then we have Sister DeLacy here, who I miss so very much. So I was just talking about DeLacy to my mom the other day. So
I miss you, DeLacy. I love you. Shout out to DeLacy. She's one of my favorite people of all time.
Yes. Well, Laila, thank you so much. If anyone has any questions for you, even about, honestly, I think that that's so interesting how you are pivoting from the research space to the acting space, and how you're going to be able to bravely bring that perspective into the entertainment and arts industry. If anyone has any questions and wants to ask you about it, where can they find you?
So they can find me on Instagram. I'm not on Instagram often, but I do try to check it at least twice a week. My @ is at Long Live Lay, and it's spelled just like that, Long Live LAI.
Long live Lay. Okay.
Love Lay.
I'm sorry. I was trying to figure out a way to put it in the chat, but
Oh,
I'll
and
be sure
also
to.
LinkedIn. LinkedIn is just first and last name. Feel free to add me anytime.
Awesome, Layla. Thank you so much. I'll put that in the show notes for anybody watching the replay. Well, everybody, thank you so much for coming on the live. Thank you for asking questions, Layla. I hope that we can continue this conversation soon.
Me too.
Be sure, everyone, to tune in next Saturday. We will be talking to Danielle Mondesir about networking, preparing for the ASHA convention, and Nima Novak about how we can be culturally responsive for Indigenous communities.
Mhm.
Until then, bye, fam.
Bye.